there's a disconnect between the jobs that are available and the people who need work, in the sense that the gap that Mike Rowe talked about between blue collar and white collar, that artificial distinction or gulf between those means that people aren't willing to look at the grey area between them and go, where's right for me within that continuum? So yeah, I think that Mike Rowe's pushing a sort of a continuum between different extremes in types of work, whereas society is too focused on a dichotomy between blue or white collar jobs. And I think that Mike Rowe wants to bridge that gap, and I don't think he's got a fully worked out plan for how to do it. At the moment, I think he's trying to bring awareness to the issue.
Yeah, makes sense. Talking about the main topic or issue, so Alistair, you mentioned that the main issue for Mike Rowe is sort of highlighting the disconnect between, or the sort of socially accepted dichotomy between blue collar and white collar workers. Is that right? So does anyone else kind of pick up on that being the main issue?
I think it was about, in some ways, our society is dysfunctional. I mean, you could get you could say, oh well, this white collar job isn't going anywhere, I'll go do a trade, get a blue collar job, you're getting paid good money, and then suddenly we have a Greece or a Cyprus and all the banks are collapsing, and your $100 an hour is now not worth $100 anymore. It's the value of the money is collapsing. So we can't just solve our problem by changing our jobs. We need to look at the way that the system is failing as well.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I've been looking at that. Obviously, with Politify, obviously I'm looking at a different system of government. Part of that, and also looking at different economic systems. In fact, I took a couple of notes about different systems that are there. I mean, I asked the question, is university obsolete? Put that out there as a question. We can look at sort of modern learning methods, including the Khan Academy, our greater access to knowledge, things like Wikipedia. But then, in that kind of a system, you've got to ask who's checking that you actually know things. At the moment, it's sort of up to lecturers. And then we can ask the question, is work obsolete? There's the concept of universal basic income. Cryptocurrency has become a thing. I'd like to talk about a thing called altruism first, which is an idea that I have for a new kind of economic system. We can also look at other alternative economic systems that are available. Anyone got any thoughts on any of that?
You're biting off a lot there.
That's what I was thinking.
I think just to bring the conversation on to point here, I think you need to reframe what the objectives of what it is we're trying to do are. Is it to pull out information that would seed into the product for discussions, or is it just to have a philosophical discussion about the video? I'm not entirely clear what it is we're trying to.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Yeah. So the main intention is to basically have a video, highlights a couple of issues, and then we think about, what are the issues that we can have a look at that might be getting discussed on Politify. And, we look at it in terms of, what are the good reasoning practices here, and, try and tease that out a little bit. So that's sort of the general frame, but I fully admit that until we've got the platform, this is going to be more of a philosophical discussion, just a general, what are your ideas, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you've selected the video for a reason. Is the objective to end up with something, some example of a solution to a situation or a challenge that we're hearing about here to then post on Politify? I mean, that's just an idea as well. To answer your question though, what rings out to me is the way society is measuring contribution needs to be addressed, because we can't do without the primary producers, as we've had the conversation around before. And now there's so many different ways to make money, well beyond what we used to consider effort would equal reward being. You know, so I know primary producers are looking at salespeople and cryptocurrency traders going, how is it fair that they've earned in 2 seconds what I earn in a month or a year? That's not right, and it creates a social risk. So I think measuring social impact and contribution rings home to me about that video.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, might we put that on the board, social impact and contribution?
Yeah, measuring social impact and contribution. And back to what you were saying about is university obsolete? I think university is just I don't know. I think the topics at university are still really relevant. I know UWA holds social impact forums. I've been going for years. And they're now literally trying to drill down as to how to measure social impact, to the point where they're creating jobs, analysts for measuring social impact. So I think there's a lot of good work that goes on at universities.
Yeah.
It's just in light of what we saw in that video, the way we're groomed to think that in order to be successful we have to go to university is obviously lots of room for challenge in that.
Yeah, one of the things I picked up on was some of the logical fallacies associated with the credential system. So if you've got a university degree, it's often thought that it means something. So it means you have that particular knowledge set or skill set. But we've all had the experience of meeting professionals or experts that, for one reason or another, conclude things that are illogical or that we might argue against. And so, does a credential mean you know things? I don't know. And in this system of online debate and social debate and direct democracy, how do we actually work out the difference between somebody that actually does know what they're talking about, somebody who does have the answers, and somebody who simply has the qualification which says they should know the answers.
Every credential is a measure of your capacity to get the credential.
Yes.
and sometimes that does mean you've learnt something and have some skills. Yeah. But there's not like all things, there's not a perfect correlation between the thing. It's like intelligence tests measure people's ability to do intelligence tests. It doesn't necessarily mean they're actually particularly intelligent, or wise for that matter.
Their ability to apply.
Oh yeah, or wise, or have any sense of reality.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things I was looking at. I actually have quite a long list, of course. It was a long video, so there's a lot of details in there. Social money into universities versus private money into universities. As a society, where do we want to actually put our money?
Well, my observation from that video, the core thing for me, is actually art. I saw the point was that work, the things that rang true for me is that work is creativity, work is art. That whatever system or process is used seems to be forgetting that it's about people creating things, and whether it's the schools, the universities, or the businesses, they're forgetting what our human thing is, what our satisfaction is being creative. And that those things have been chopped apart is the big hole in the system. It's that at every level, people are expressing some kind of art. And as the guy said, the people who seem to, whatever they're doing, have some passion about it, is they're treating it with some kind of art, as well as knowledge, credentials, skills, experience. But there has to be that, and I think that's kind of where that seemed to be, to me, actually the essence of the issue, is that we've taken art out of. And as he said, the industrial arts was what, VOTEC, I don't think we use that in Australia, but the vocational technical education actually is almost moving from industrial arts, taking the art out of it. And actually, maybe the issue is to put the art back in at every level, even in the arts.
No, wonderful points you're making. Yeah, I think this is right on the money of sort of where I was thinking as well. You know, we're looking at human passion. We're looking at satisfaction. How do we gain satisfaction out of our work, out of our job? You know? I have a very personal experience with this, where I was taken away from life due to an illness. So I spent 4 years recovering from a thing called chronic fatigue syndrome, and basically couldn't work. And my level of satisfaction went down because there were things I wanted to do, things I wanted to achieve. And one of the things that got me out was actually getting a job where I was pushing a broom around. I was cleaning up swarf. I was working in a metalworking shop, so it was an engineering shop, yeah. And, you know, I'd loved the idea of manufacturing, so I've thought of myself as a bit of an inventor pretty much all my life, wanting to create things. And so it made sense to go into this job and in this industry and to be a part of it as a way of understanding how to build things. And it was very satisfying to start by pushing a broom around because that's what I could do. That's what got me back into work and back into life. So from that point of view, my job gave me a sense of purpose, a sense of satisfaction, gave me exercise, got me out into the world and had me being, you know, a productive member of society, I guess, but also a person on a path. I knew where I wanted to go, and this job was a way of moving forward with that. Yeah, so I guess if we automate, be too efficient, you know, are we taking that away from people? I think that was perhaps part of Mark Rowe's point. Yeah.
The effectiveness was the term he preferred to efficient. Like, well, we have machines to do the robot work, to do the pop out more widgets. So pretending we're going to contribute these days with more efficiency is a misapprehension. It's being effective and creative that are the adding value.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd like to move the conversation temporarily away from the idea of work and towards the idea of fulfillment. I think different people get different levels of fulfillment from different things in their life. Like, for example, today I saw a TED talk where this person was saying that work-life balance is a false dichotomy and that we should view our life and everything in it as a single process that we can continuously improve a little bit at a time. And I'm inclined to agree with that. I'm someone who works for myself and I get a lot of job satisfaction from that. But I don't think skills that we learn should purely be directed towards doing work in a job. I'm going to go on a tangent here and say that there is a camping festival that happens every year in Perth, which is a combined art/music/camping festival, and you get a lot of really interesting things happen, like people make giant catapults, for example, or a life-size replica of the Millennium Falcon that's actually a art exhibition inside, and things like that. And I'm like, well, no one's has that as their job just to do stuff for Blazing Swan each year, but the people who do get a lot of satisfaction out of the things they produce and the things they interact with other people on. And I'm like, well, if people got a more holistic education and a more better grounded life experience, they'd be able to do a lot of interesting things both within and outside of the workplace that would give them a lot of fulfillment. And that's why I think that university doesn't have to lead to a job. It can lead to other things that are more interesting than work, or things that can become interesting first and then become work later. But unfortunately what we see in the university funding arena, bringing it back to something Cameron was talking about, is when you get universities that are largely privately funded, what you get is a lot of universities that feel that they have to serve the companies that are funding them, and therefore you get a lot of job readiness focus in degrees, which takes away a lot of the more ephemeral goals of a university, which is things like pure research, artistic exploration, learning for the sake of distributing knowledge. A lot of these things get pushed by the wayside when there's too much corporate funding in universities. So maybe the problem isn't universities, maybe the problem is how they're funded these days.
Makes sense. Yeah, I sort of touched on these just as subject headings, but you know, do any of you have a thought on the concept of universal basic income?
I do. Also, I have another concept that I'm developing, which is in a similar vein. It's called negative rent.
Okay.
So I look at this as a solution not just for housing affordability, but also for rebuilding communities. Because say a minimum wage worker, so I get mixed up a bit, a minimum wage worker spends a lot of time working just to meet their rent obligations, unless they're lucky enough to already own a house or they live with their parents or something like that. They spend a lot of time working just to pay that rent, which at the moment is pretty high because we've just had a big mining boom, so all the rents have shot up. So under this concept of negative rent, they would be paid to look after a property, kind of like a caretaker. So it's a different model to what we have now, where people will buy a house and take out a mortgage, or they'll lease it and they'll have regular rent inspections and a property manager. Under this model, they're responsible for the house, so they're responsible and accountable, and they need to be responsible for all of the maintenance. Say if a storm destroys the roof, they're responsible for getting the roof replaced or patched up or something like that. Something which you'd normally call a property manager for, they are responsible for as a caretaker. But the way it works with a negative rent is they're actually paid in a cryptocurrency. And this cryptocurrency, because you can make programmable money, you can have like smart contracts and all these extra things built into the cryptocurrency system that you can't have built into normal fiat currency. We can set up things like services like Airtasker, where people in the community can earn this cryptocurrency by coming out and fixing odd jobs and things like that at people's houses. So this cryptocurrency would have many other community aspects. It'd be able to access all kinds of services to help them look after this house that they're a caretaker for, and they would also potentially have more time to do community and environmental work as well. So if we are concerned that people are losing jobs to automation, such as automated checkout, even IT work being moved to the cloud and stuff like that, then that gives people free time to do work that isn't normally done by the market system at the moment, such as cleaning up all the plastic bottles and cleaning up rivers and stuff like that. So I hope this negative rent concept will be very complementary to the universal basic income and will help give another way forward for how people can live and have a roof over their head and form communities that are mutually beneficial and things like that.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Good idea.
Fantastic. So you've already got some written material about it, yeah.
Yeah, I wrote an article on Medium, so I'll forward that to the people here so they can have a read of it. So.
Yeah. A couple of questions that come to mind. Who offers up the properties, and how does the cryptocurrency, the earning of a cryptocurrency, displace any cost that the person owning the property or individual or organisation owning the property?
So for the first question,
yep.
Properties are constantly being built all the time. You know, we can have a boom, a housing boom and a construction boom, and we've had them in Ireland, we've had them in China, we've had them in Australia here. We suddenly have all these properties, and they don't have tenants, they don't have anyone looking after them, but maybe money is still owed on them, and the bank might be looking at repossessing the property and trying to auction it off and sell it. And in cases in the past, such as in the United States, where in Detroit, Michigan, where we've had housing bubbles before, there's been an enormous social cost of this. So the bank managers and the executives have taken all the money and they've given themselves bonuses and stuff, but then the public has bore the social cost, not just of bailing out the banks, but also providing services like firefighting and police and all that, all these services to communities which have just basically been destroyed. They've had the economic rug pulled out from under them. So there's been a huge social cost. So the way this negative red community would work is it would be the value of the cryptocurrency comes from the network of the people using it. You need to have enough people who believe in the idea and want to give it a decent chance of working, even though to start with there would be a lot of teething issues with it. Nothing's going to work straight away. There's always going to be problems, and people will have disagreements, and you know, human nature will interfere, all those sort of things. But I'm confident that if we set it up, we've got good technology, and people come in with the right attitude, they're responsible and they're accountable. They're the key parts.
Yep.
Then we can show a workable system, which will be part of something that we can use here anywhere in the world. You know, once we show that we can solve that problem for a housing bubble in one country, the next time there's a housing bubble in another country, we can say that worked really well, say in Ireland or in China. We can now use it in Australia or vice versa. So
Yeah, it makes sense. And I imagine that you know, the individuals that take on these negative rent arrangements, there'll be a contract there. So you know, the responsibility would be a part of that contract. There'd be consequences for you know, say they didn't maintain the house, or they even wrecked the house or something like that. You know, and there'd be some sort of cost to them.
My only chime in there is that my understanding with cryptocurrency is that there is no regulation at a government level. So I sort of feel a danger there in that it's going to be hard for the government to plan social welfare systems and infrastructure and taxes when they don't know what this growing economy is doing privately.
sure.
So I was doing a similar setup where we're establishing cooperatives that go towards achieving a global goal. So little projects, lots of them, lots of businesses that are registered. So they get audited, and the government can see exactly what money's being washed in and out and that kind of thing. But it measures contribution. In the organisations I've run, I've always been very keen to ensure that an employee can go forward by working for us and achieve what they want to achieve. So, you know, just creating opportunity. It's funny, I've got a book on me now called Opportunity. One of our greatest internet marketers. How do you spot an opportunity? How do you find an opportunity? All that kind of thing. This fellow is a seasoned entrepreneur, but he found his niche in creating digital products. But yeah, right from the start of me hearing about cryptocurrencies and ICOs, my background being asset management and capital raising, I'm thinking, well, if you go off the grid, how does the government plan taxes, infrastructure, welfare, all that kind of stuff? There needs to be some communication. So I felt comfortable with creating cooperatives whereby, we're measuring contribution not through a dollar, but through something that marries to a dollar. You know, 1,000 points of contribution equals $1,000. You know, just because no one actually gave you a job, you did something else in the contribution. It's there, it's registered, so that the government can align to this and sort of see what everyone is looking for and needing and that kind of thing. And just to make sure that it was always constructive, I kind of started attaching the projects to a global goal. You know, gender equality, no poverty, sustainable economies, all that kind of stuff. So we're talking a similar language when we want to solve a social problem through measuring contribution. But yeah, ICOs and cryptocurrencies just really enough there's a disconnect between what the people that are trying to run our economy and tax us accordingly.
Well, one of the great things about cryptocurrency, I mean, there's a lot to learn there. One of the things we need to learn is that it is possible to create money from nothing. But we've also seen that it can be used for money laundering. So, you know, people can basically earn money through doing social harm, social wrong. They put it through a cryptocurrency, comes out the other side, and nobody knows where they got the money from. So that's one of the dangers, and I think, I think probably why you're bringing this up. You sort of want to see, you know, in terms of money management and asset management, things like that, government often will get involved to stop some of the social harm that occurs. Now the other side of it is the people that champion cryptocurrency often do it because they don't want government interference, because they feel like government very often is saying no to things that actually is of social benefit.
But imagine a world with no government.
Yes, and no police. Yeah, you could say police as well. Imagine a world with no police. Police were invented for a reason. Government was invented for a reason.
I've watched cryptocurrencies be swayed wildly by the best speaker, the best seller, and the best salespeople do not have the technique or understanding, I believe, to run an economy. It scares me. But in some countries, they're outlawing ICOs and cryptocurrencies. ASIC is very well known to, we're very well known to each other. They are making you register an ICO now, and cryptos might be far behind, because if you're going to swing the monetary system, you know, and go underground with it, yeah, how do you run an economy?
One of the things I'd like to talk about, actually, it ties this in. I think it's a bit of a solution. The concept, I call it altruism first. Basically creating an organisation that puts social benefit first and foremost. So learning from cryptocurrency, we've learned that you can actually invent money out of nothing. So if we use the tools of Politify, we actually could all decide on what are the activities that are of social benefit and which social activities do we want to reward first and foremost. So people can take on a job, and it could be a gigging type job, it could be a job that's a role, you know, there could be traditional ways of operating it, there could be modern ways of operating it. But the point is, people are doing work for social benefit, and it's agreed social benefit. So there's your accountability, and generating an accounting of the effort that you put in, the expertise that you put in, any resources that you add, any kind of contribution. Time, of course. Yeah. So time, expertise, energy, resources. So we basically just account in a very true, real fashion, and then once you've got that accounting, you've got essentially a currency that you can then use to purchase things that are more for your self-interest. So you do your social work first, we all help each other, and then you do your personal, selfish, self-interested things. You know? And this is a kind of complete opposite to the way the current economy works, which, you know, current economy sort of rewards you know, self-interest first and foremost, and that's why we're sort of seeing a disconnect between, you know, the workers and the billionaires, for example. You know, and there's this idea of the negotiated wage, you know, which can have one person doing the exact same work as another person, totally different pay rates. You know, we've got gender inequalities as a result of this. You know, we've got, you know, cultural inequalities as a result of this, and we've got international trading of work, trading of labour. So jobs can be taken from one country to expensive to hire people and shipped over to another country where it's very cheap, and you know, of course, that country grows and gets powerful and big. We all know who we're talking about, China, at the expense of other countries. You know, America's fighting against that. Australia should be fighting against that. I don't know that they are. Yeah, so I see this as sort of a solution to that problem, and it would require a system like Politify where we can actually agree on what is a social task that we want to reward, and then it would require another currency mechanism to account for it.
I'm curious because I think what you say already, that altruistic thing happens in the non-money economy anyway, because that's human beings. That's what happens in family. So you have all sorts of social contexts, family and friends, where that sort of stuff is much more inclined to come first. So I'm not sure whether it needs. I'm in two minds about whether it's useful to have it measured.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that the nature of altruism, like just because we can value things through money, I'm not sure to what degree all valuable things should be quantified or formally valued. It's a hard, I mean, it's not an absolute, I know, but I'm just not sure whether it's useful. At what point is it just because there's issues with how we measure value and trade value and acknowledge value? I'm not sure that the solution is to better value altruism. Maybe.
Well, here's a question.
Yeah.
How do you raise funds for a charitable cause? So let's take a cause, for example, homelessness.
Yep.
One, why does homelessness still exist? We've got to ask that question. And two, if you want to actually solve the problem of homelessness, how do we create it? How do we solve that? And how do you pay for the people who would be working to help solve that problem? The other question I would ask to that is, what would the world look like if more social benefit actions were rewarded? You know, and if people were driven towards them as opposed to being driven towards...
Yeah, look, I'm not differing with the embedded critique in your question. My point was actually really more asking another question. Like, I'm just making an observation. For example, children in most homes aren't homeless. In most families are not homeless, but they're not making any money. They're not contributing labour, and they might contribute some help around the house, but they're not. So there's the altruism thing is looking after them, but we're not treating the homeless people with the same value that parents treat children. So all I'm saying is that I'm not saying you need exactly the same solution as in a family or a nuclear family for homeless people, but all the solution isn't about finding a monetary mechanism to fix the problem. Some of the solution is behavioural. Some of the solution is, you've got a spare room maybe? Set things up such that it doesn't cost money, but someone lives in the home. More like your kind of thinking where, you're sort of negative rent, negative value things, that sometimes there's not a, so I'm just throwing that into the mix to realise that, sometimes the way, it needs a mix and a balance, and I'm not sure where the boundary is. I mean, the lefties would talk about the commodifying of everything. Yeah. It's like, maybe we need to decommodify. So just because maybe things are over-commodified or everything seems to be driven by things being commodities, the solution isn't to turn into commodities all the other important things. It's like, how do you measure love?
Yes.
I mean, I remember speaking to a CEO of an organisation I worked for, and he declared to me with absolute, everything can be measured. I'm like, I don't think so. He says, well, what do you mean? I said, well, how much do you love your kids? In what units do you measure that? Not everything can be measured. It's a ridiculous notion to think that everything can be measured. And when you have the point of view that everything can be measured, I think that's actually kind of dangerous. So it's just like finding that balance between where it's useful to measure things and where it's not.
Yeah.
I don't know where the boundary is, that's why I framed it as a question. But I think we just need to keep aware that, you know, sometimes solutions are qualitative,
Yep.
personal, emotional, rather than quantitative.
Yeah,
Final.
totally.
Sorry, I've had a rant.
No, you are fantastic. I love that you brought this up. I'm a big believer in the idea of, you know, open questions, and then you ask a question and then you follow it and you try and find out, you know, where does the answer sort of lie. And in exploring that, you come up with other ideas. Also a big believer in the idea of counter-argument. This comes back to the concept of the Socratic web. You know, nobody has a monopoly on truth, you know, so if we have argument, counter-argument, then we get to see all the different sides of things, and you know that I feel is one of the opportunities of Politify, is to introduce counter-argument coming from the population. So not just coming from a few figures, but coming from the population, and then we can all get in and discuss and debate and try to find answers.
It's interesting. We've had a wonderful free-ranging conversation, but it does seem to have travelled away from the video, and which is fine.
Yeah.
And it's meant to be stimulating, but there was kind of a point of providing as a framework. I think you're also talking about another stage after talking. Is it worth? I'm not sure. I haven't been keeping time. Is it worth going to that next stage about? I don't think we've defined the problem. I think your idea was to then look at how, if a problem's defined out of looking at the video, how do we? But I'm not sure we're in a position. I don't think this free-ranging conversation will define the problem out of the video.
Can I say something about the homelessness
Yeah.
thing? So I went to a discussion thing with Poverty Action Network. It was in the city. There was maybe about 20 people there, maybe more, but there was a good mix of people. Like there were people who had previously been homeless and then addressed Parliament about their homelessness, because some of the Green senators called them in, and that was pretty impressive. They got up and spoke and addressed Parliament about it, and there were other people who had been in unions. There were people from the tenancy union, people from who did social work, all kinds of community work, and of course I got up and I talked about this negative rent thing, and there was maybe one other guy who was interested in blockchain or maybe just second. There was two other guys who were interested in blockchain, but most people were just non-techie. It wasn't something that they knew much about. It was a bit scary for them. But the guy who had actually gone up to address Parliament, he was looking at buying some property out in a rural area to set that up so the homeless people could live there. But I started looking into that, and I realised that there's actually a problem with rural homelessness, which is mostly invisible to us. So I started looking into a problem which I didn't even knew existed. So this issue and apparently it's a lot. It's like 60% of the homeless population is rural. They're just out living in some very shack-like or whatever it is, tarps or something like that, out in the middle of the bush, and there's many reasons why they're like that, and there's not many services or economic opportunities in rural areas, which is also a problem for people in rural areas who aren't homeless. They're seeing that services are drying up, and even things like the post office is closing down. They're losing all of these services, and when I'm interested in building these negative rent communities, I would hope to have built into that kind of fabric all kinds of new services that are community-based and decentralised and cooperative. And I kind of see setting up solutions for rural homelessness as an opportunity to help build some of these services, test them out, that may only be concepts, things like e-health, new ways of providing mental health services which use better technology and processes than what is currently provided, because a lot of these public services, mental health and everything, are massively under strain and are very ineffective and things like that. So if we design these systems to give the attention and TLC and everything to rural homeless people, And then if we can prove that they work, we can then make them available to non-homeless people in rural areas, and as they start to use them, because literally they have no services, so they start to use them, and as they improve, they can be used in more urban areas as well, as people might go there. If there's something that the existing public service can't do for them, then these new services could assist them. So I came back from that meeting with all these ideas, but I was just feeling that it wasn't so easy for me to share with them, because they were all quite non-technical people. I'm developing all this technical stuff, the latest biotech, the latest crypto, all this sort of stuff, but then I'm finding that sometimes you've got to do things a low-tech way as well. Like, I was looking at eNose technology for sniffing out mould and properties, but then I discovered that really eNose technology is still a long way off and quite expensive. Might as well just train dogs to go and sniff out properties. So one of the ladies that I was working with in this service that I set up, called the Biosecurity Volunteer Task Force, Urban Biosecurity Volunteer Task Force, she had previously worked for a company that did dog scent work, trained dogs for scent work. So because this eNose stuff wasn't ready, I was actually able to get this lady who wasn't technical but had skills in this area to do that thing. And I think we'll find that all the way through. It's we've got some new technical thing, but then here's a guy or a girl with the skills that can do it in a low-tech way but still get it done. And then maybe in the future, if the technical stuff is ready, we can bring it in, we can complement it with that. So
yeah, that's great, Chris. I mean, what I'm hearing in what you're talking about is the power of community, the power of crowd. You can bring in resources that individuals don't have, or that regions don't have. Bring it to a problem. Now, just to address what you were bringing up, we have sort of not had a formal change of sections, but the intention was to go from the video into talking about community projects, and we've actually done that just naturally. So you're starting to talk about a couple of projects that you're interested in and wanting to get off the ground, or you've got them off the ground, you want to continue them and grow them. And so I've talked about another project of mine which I call Altruism First. So a couple of the projects of interest that just are around Politify. So there's the Bumper Bonanza Sale, which is basically raising money for Politify by the selling of bumper stickers. And I invite you all to participate with that. If you can all find 10 people that you can sell a bumper sticker to, then it's an extra $100 in the bank account that we can put towards getting that platform developed. Another project is the Legal Purpose Initiative. So this is all laws have a purpose. All laws need to be connected back to a social benefit. If they're not, then they must be considered authoritarian in nature and they need to be removed. You've got to ask the question, who is it this country set up to benefit? If it's not set up to benefit the individuals within it, then why do we do it?
That's a big question.
Yeah, it's a very big question. So this concept of the Legal Purpose Initiative is actually looking at that and just basically looking at all of our laws and how they relate back to social benefit. And we all really need to be aware of the benefit that is attached to a law. Self-improvement as a national ambition. So create a national self-improvement day. Now, the news and articles section has a couple of these. They're basically articles in there. And on this one, the self-improvement as a national ambition, we can consider learnings from the Are You OK Day. So that's been a very successful campaign, and we have a look at learnings from that and see if we can take from that, learn from that, and develop our own national day. Another one is the Socratic web. So the Socratic web is the solution to fake news, storytelling and misinformation. So again, that's on the news and articles section. And then altruism first, we've talked about that. And the final one is farmers' growth. So the concept of farmers' growth is creating food abundance. So leveraging the economic system that I talked about with altruism first, we build protections for farmers and growers of food. Now the background to this is that, farmers, we need farmers. We need them to do the work that they do. And for the last 60 odd years in Australia, primary industry has sort of been getting either attacked or shipped overseas. But let's look at this concept of food abundance. Let's protect farmers through drought, through flood, through needles in strawberries. Let's protect them through all these things that they face. Let's protect them through woolies and coals screwing them to the earth. And if we tie sort of farmers' growth into altruism first, then once you create the currency, you then have the opportunity for people to purchase some of the abundant food that is available. Or it could be a part of a service. Yeah. So these are just some of the community projects that I'm looking at, and I'm basically opening the question up. Again, it's an open-ended question. How do we get some of these projects up and running and going? And I don't think we should look at the answer to that today because we're running a bit over time.
Carry over to the next meeting.
Yeah, carry over to the next meeting.
I'd make a general suggestion, because you described Politify as a suite of tools.
Yes.
So maybe rather, because this has been wonderfully broad-ranging, and someone who likes to look at things from a holistic perspective, I embrace and adore that. But this is in the context of the Politify platform. So maybe it's good to delve into the tools that Politify about, even if they're not functioning and working, but use them as a framework. So it actually doesn't matter about the particular issues necessarily. I'd feel enriched by this process, because I can have a discussion about issues with friends, with family, social workmates, you guys, and we can nut some really important stuff out. But actually embracing the tools of Politify to help, even if we're not using them per se, but you talk about Socratic processes, the concepts behind it. So I feel more enriched if whatever issues we have and wherever they come from, we start using these meetings to use those tools, because that prepares us for Politify and prepares Politify for us. So that I'd get more out of it.
Yeah, fantastic suggestion. Love it.
Sorry, I have to leave. I was only able to stay till 9 p.m.
No problem, Dave. Yeah, thank you.
You've done well.
So basically I will say to you, Dahi, that yes, watch this space. As Robert's alluded to, there will be tools to develop community projects.
Nice to meet you all. I'll see you all in due course.
Thanks.
Good to meet you.
See ya.
So great question, Robert. And basically, the premise of the platform is that it allows anybody to suggest or put forward a suggestion for social change. And that can be a one-liner. In fact, most things are designed to be single idea sentences.
Sure.
So that basically you can challenge one part of an idea, keep the other part of the idea, very granular that way. Yeah. And then you can build up the projects from multiple component ideas. So if we have a heading like farmers' growth, for example, that is just a heading, farmers' growth, and then you state the problem. The problem is that farmers are not protected through drought, they're not protected through all flood and all these other problems. You can even have a list of all the things that farmers are affected by that the average person doesn't see. And so, we're detailing the problem. and then people can suggest solutions. They can suggest individual solutions to the individual problems, or they can suggest an overarching solution to the problem. And then we can start to vote on the different ones that we like as a society.